Okay, we're back. Here's the homework. You're going to write a program that will copy 2 bits out of port C, specifically 3 and 2, to port B1 or B54, B10 or 54. If pin D0 is 0, it goes to 10. If pin D0 is 1, send it to 54 rather. So you're basically making a 2-bit mux. All right. Question?
Yeah, you said UL. I always mean like the set the ports as...
Set them as inputs or outputs as needed. I will say use only the bits required as outputs. So don't set bits that don't need to be outputs as outputs. Only set up the bits that have to be outputs. What are the bits that have to be outputs? Do you think on it? There are only 4 bits that need to be outputs. Everything else can be an input. Okay? So that is the homework. And it's at the start of this video. So I think we're only going to end up with 2 videos today. So if you're looking for that, that's where we are. All right. I'm going to go through the full lectures, I think, the full lecture videos. Okay. I got to move my mouse again. Don't record. Yes? Tomorrow. If you guys had just kind of held your tongues, I might have been swayed. Here's why. It is a skills exercise. The lab is an application of your skills. The more exercises you have before you get to lab, the easier your lab is going to be. This is designed to get you to continue working with conditionals and to push home the new stuff we've done in Chapter 5. Yes, it is a lot of work. However, I will tell you that you are still getting off easy because in theory, you're supposed to be doing 2 hours of work for every hour that you have of class. So you have 3 hours of class a day. That means 6 hours of outside classwork. So you are aware that is what you are expected to do. Did you spend 6 hours on the homework last night? No. Okay. So yeah, let's do tomorrow. All right, let's make sure the video is correct here. There we go. All right, here we go. Yes, you are expected to work 9 hours a day on this course. It's 3 credits. 3 credits is 3 credits is 3 credits. Chapter 6. Some of this we've already done. We've done macros, but we're going to see some more stuff in addition to macros now. First thing we're going to talk about is more assembler directives. And in some ways, it's blatantly obvious that this works, but in other ways, it's really confusing. So there are assembler directives that are math. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. Here's the weird thing, though. Assembler directives are evaluated at compile time. This is worth writing down like 400 times. Evaluated at assembly time. Not runtime. What's the difference between assembly time and runtime? Runtime is how long it takes you to run a 5K. No, has nothing to do with running with your feet. Running what? What's running?
Overall clock.
It's clock time as it's actually running on the hardware. So, for example, this instruction right here. In no way, it still runs in one cycle. It doesn't call the add instruction, okay? It is evaluated at assembly time. So at assembly time, it figures out, where's my mouse? It figures out that 5 plus 3 is what? It's 8. I have to double check though, because as we've established, arithmetic is not my strong suit. It evaluates that as 8, and where's my mouse? So it turns that instruction from 5 plus 3 into LDI 8. Similarly, it figures out that 5 times 7 is 35. It figures out that 8 divided by 2 is 4. It does it at assemble time, and so it makes the machine code still one cycle. We've already seen examples of this. We've seen examples in, my mouse just keeps disappearing, in the add I macro. Remember, we had to write an add I macro. What did we say? We said that it was really sub I rd comma negative at 0. Negative sign. We've already seen it used. So in some ways, it's like, well, duh, of course you can do that. But it's evaluated at assembly time. So in addition to our basic arithmetic operations, we have logical operations. We've got and or, and exclusive or. So this is great for masking stuff. Rather than just writing down a number, you can write it down in terms of the operand anded with your mask. Okay? One of the operations that's not on here is the tilde. The tilde is the bitwise negation. That should be on there. I feel like that's super important. Bitwise negation. Furthermore, and this is more powerful, this is shifting. Logical shifting specifically. But it's more powerful than the LSL and the LSR instructions because you can tell it how many bits to shift. Learn to love this shift operator, okay? It's not going away, and it's much more useful than it might first appear. Okay, we can shift things. Shifting. Let's clear out some of this ink here. Taking this number and shifting it by 1 binary place, or taking this number and shifting it right by 2 binary places. So if we take 8 and shift it over by 2 places, that's 1, 0. Excuse me. So shifting, 1 minute. Shifting by 2 places is the same as dividing by 4. Shifting right by 3 places is the same as dividing by 8. Okay. We are going to make use of this when it comes time to talk about ROM stuff. In chapter 6, we do talk about ROM access, right? How many people found that particular section stupidly confusing? Yeah, right? I will make it easy for you because we're just going to write a macro to do it. We're going to write the macro once. We're never going to care about it again, okay? So that's fine. But it will involve the shift operator. Do I need to? Can we skip this? High and low? We're good? High, low. Great. We've already dealt with that. Okay, this, some of it's going to be a review, and it's going to lead into the next type of addressing mode. We have talked about single register addressing mode. Anything that takes 1 register is single register addressing mode. I have fixed the slides here. The opcode is 11 bits, and the register is 5 bits, because we can access all 31 registers. There is a single register addressing mode with immediate, and the difference here is it's 4 bits. And as you saw on the homework where you had to hand assemble things, you just look at the lower 4 bits of the register number, and that gives you 16 to 31, and you got 8 bits of immediate. So we've got LDI, sub I, and I. Okay, we've talked about all of these. Look, I've got the, that's how you do an add I. Okay, all of that's review. But it's single register with immediate addressing mode. It's an addressing mode. Addressing modes describe where the data is coming from. In this case, it's an immediate value. In the previous example, it's coming from a single register. If it's not coming from a single register, it's coming from 2 registers. And we've had our fill of those: add, subtract, and, exclusive or. Out of curiosity, just, are you all with me? Or I. What kind of addressing mode is that?
Yeah, two register.
It is not 2 register. 2 register would have something like RD, RR.
One register with immediate value.
It's 1 register with immediate value. That's right. Okay. Let me just clear off all this ink so that when I come back to these slides later, I'm not like, what the hell is or I doing here? The 2 register mode is most of them. It's the majority. Direct addressing mode you've seen. LDS and STS. It's some 5-bit quantity for the destination, and the source is 16 bits of address. Whether it's STS or LDS, they're both direct addressing modes. No big problems there? We've seen those. IO direct addressing mode. Same thing, but we use a small subset of memory to talk about just the IO portion. In and out. SBI and CBI. Okay. Here's the new one. And some of you who have read the lab came up to me and said, what the hell is register X? Well, register X is a made-up register. But it has to do with a new kind of addressing mode called indirect addressing mode. Indirect addressing mode is 1 step removed from direct addressing mode. In direct addressing mode, you want to know where the data is coming from? You look in this address. So 1 arrow, and there's your data. It's direct. You get the address, boom, done. Indirect, you want to know where it is? Well, first you go to the X register, and then the X register tells you where it is. It's 2 steps. That's it. It's direct versus indirect. 1 step or 2 steps. So what is the X, the Y, and the Z registers? Well, these are 3 different registers that are just made up of our general purpose registers. Okay? The upper 6 registers are concatenated together to form 3 16-bit registers. We need 16 bits because our memory space takes up 16 bits. Remember when we first started talking about memory sizes, we said that memories have some number of address lines. Well, this memory has 16 address lines. So we need 16 bits to address into it. So we take R27, 27, and R26, we stick them together, and we call that the X register. We take 29 and 28, we call that the Y register. And we take 30 and 31, we call that the Z register. For a long time, I had no clue how to remember whether 27 was the more significant or the least significant of X. But as I mentioned, I think before and the class before that, the higher the register, the more significant. More higher, more significant. More flags, more fun. Okay? So 27 is called XH. 26 is called XL. Together, they're called X. So we now have 2 new instructions, indirect addressing mode instructions. They're called LD and ST. And they're companions to LDS and STS. The difference is LDS is direct addressing mode. You give it the full address. LD is indirect addressing. So you just tell it, oh yeah, use X or Y or Z, and it's smart enough to go over here. Now, I've given out some macros, right? Something like LDIW. Have I done one of those? Yeah, LDIW. Well, have LDIW in the back of your mind as I look at this next slide. write a program to copy the value 55 into memory locations 140 through 144. We're going to go back to open board for a second. And I got to make sure that I go to open board. Okay. And I got to get out of this. Okay. And then I got to go over here. Okay. Put 55 into locations 140 through, what was it, 145? 145. That's hex. All right, so here's how you would have done it before today. LDI R16 55 STS 140 R16 it's okay. It makes it a little shorter to do. 144. STS 141 R16. STS 142 R16. It takes a little while to write, but it's not particularly complicated, right? 143 R16. STS $144 R16. Done. That's not bad, right? There's nothing really wrong with that approach, right? It works. Well, that's the point, is to overwrite the memory locations. The idea is you have memory over here, 140 through 144, and whatever's in them, you don't care. You want them to all be 55. You're overwriting the question itself. The question says put 55 in all these memory locations. Not a big deal, right? In fact, you could do it for 144 or 145. All you'd have to do is one extra instruction. Totally cool, right? Well, what happens if I change it from 140 to 144 to 100 to 200? You want to type those? Yeah, no? When I was in 4th grade, I got in trouble. I know you're shocked. And I was assigned like a write this 100 times or something. I am sorry. I forget what it was. So I opened up a word processor and I typed I am sorry 140 times. Honest to God, I typed it out 100 times. Well, I got in the next day, and you can imagine my 4th grade teacher, a delightful woman by the name of Miss Kapinski. She wasn't too thrilled. She thought I had copied and pasted it 140 times. I'm like, no, I really typed it out 140 times. But that apparently was not the point of the exercise. So let's go into the better way, the more expandable way, right? So if we want to do this from 140 to 144, how many memory locations are we actually writing to? I think the total is 5. We're writing 5 times. So I'm going to take advantage of Well, yes, I'm going to take advantage of a counter, that looping construct that we talked about last time. So let's LDI R19 with 5. All right. And then here's my loop label. My whole brain has gone out the window after telling that story. She slammed a ruler right on my desk, man. She broke a yardstick. It wasn't on me, but it was like right in front of me. I'm like traumatized now. All right. So one of the other things I got to do is I got to get that number 55 into some register. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, hold on, get rid of this label for a second. I'm not there yet. I'm not there. I got so much stuff to prepare for. I've got to load up what we call an index register. X, Y, and Z are called index register. I got to get 140 in there. So here's what I'm going to do. LDI YH with 1. LDI Y, that's not a Y, YL with 40. So together that's 140. If anybody thinks I'm doing something in a stupid way, feel free to shout it out as I'm doing it. All right. Now I've got 140 is Y. And here's where my loop is going to be. L1. And I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so I may have to go back. So if you want to hold back for a couple of lines as I go through this. ST Y, comma, R16, increment YL, decrement R19, branch not equal to L1. I think that's okay. Let me just kind of check over what I did here. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Okay. This does exactly the same thing. It stores whatever is in R16 into, and this is a weird turn of phrase, into the address pointed to by Y. What that means is we have the Y register. Y has a number in it, 140. 140 is a location in memory. So it's the address pointed to by Y. So our instruction tells us what index register to use, because we do have X and we have Z. So it says use whatever's in Y as the appropriate address. That's why it's called indirect addressing mode. So now if I wanted to change this from 140 to 240, all I would have to do, almost, is change the counter. I could change the counter to FF, and that would do 255 times. So maybe I'm off by 1 there. I might go from 140 to 230 F, right? Yeah, almost there. Except there's a problem. Anybody who's read the chapter see the problem that might occur? No, we haven't actually dealt with the stack yet. Aiden.
Increment over FF.
Yeah, I'll increment over FF. So let's just say we start at 140, we increment to 141, blah, blah, blah. When we get to 1FF, and I add 1 to that, it's only incrementing the lower byte. So what I'm going to end up is back at 100. Which is not what I wanted. Where did I want to be? After 1F, what's the next address I should be writing into? 200. Now, we covered earlier today how to do 16-bit math, right? We could add with carry and so forth. Well, we could, but there's a better way. All right. And actually, there's a couple of things that I would improve about this. So let me give you an improved version here. First off, I'm just going to make that a EQU. Start address, start A, is 140. Dot EQU num bytes. I'll set that to 5 for now. That's the same as last time. Now when I set things up, got a LDI R19 with num bytes, LDI R16 with 55. That hasn't changed. When I LDI, when I build up my Y register, I've got a couple of options. First off, I can't do 1 and 40 anymore because I only have this start A equality. So my first guess then would be to go like this. LDI, YH, and use the high macro. High of start A. LDI YL low of start A. My second option is to use a macro I've already been given. LDIW YH YL start A. Which it's the same thing. It does this. Okay. But it's handy because it just tells you what's going on. It allows you to write it in one line. I like my assembly lines to, as much as possible, to be a complete thought. So the complete thought of this line is get start A into the index register called Y. And here's where things get a little interesting. So we still have our ST, Y, leave a little space after the comma, R16, decrement R19, because that's our counter, branch not equal, BRNE to loop, here's loop. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a slightly different version of the indirect addressing mode. It's called indirect with post increment. And all you have to do it is just put a plus after Y. Post increment should sound familiar if you've had C. When you say something like I++, that's a post increment operator. Not what we're doing here in assembly, but it's the same process. We're going to use Y and add 1 to it after. So this is a fairly common pattern you'll see to do what's called iterate through memory. You just use ST. It takes care of the 16-bit addition. When you go from 1FF and increment it, it will end up at 200, not back at 100. There is one other kind of increment operation as an indirect addressing mode, and it's called the pre-decrement. And that's how you would use it. I find I don't use the pre-decrement nearly as often as I use the post-increment. Okay, but you can do it. In that case, it actually decrements the address and then stores. So pre-decrement's a little bit more like, well, if you're here, say Y points here, it will move Y and then store R16. So it works the same way, it's just the order is slightly changed. So instead of post-increment, where Y points here, you store R16 and then increment Y. Here, Y points to the next empty value, whereas in pre-decrement, it always points to the last thing that was put in. Okay, so there is pre-decrement and post-decrement. It happens automatically. It deals with the 16-bit addition quite nicely. I'm a big fan of that. Gosh, there is, I'm going to tell you that it exists, and I'm going to tell you that we won't be using it this semester, just because of time. I usually wait for the freshmen to giggle at this one. Good on you for no giggles. These two instructions are useful when you're dealing with complex data structures, like a structure in C. They stand for store with displacement and load with displacement. What are we doing on time? I don't have time for my story. Just know for now, just know that the type of addressing that will happen, STD, they still work on the index registers. It's a form of indirect addressing, but you can give them a short offset. So you can always take whatever Y is and add some number of bytes to it. Yes?
Is there two STDs for Z and a Y on the list?
Because it does not work with X. If you look at LD, there's like 30 LDs. And that is a good point, though. STD and LDD only work with Y and Z. They do not work with the X register. So LD and ST, they work with X or Y or Z. STD and LD are more restrictive. They only work with Y or Z. We're about to move into one more kind of instruction that is even further limited, only works with Z. But to get there, we got to take a trip back into assembler directives. Okay. Fixed data is data that, by its definition, doesn't change. So examples of fixed data might be some constants. They might be strings, like messages that you want to send to the user. So every time my car turns on, I see on my little display, hello. Or I think actually it's even smarter than that. It knows what time it is, so it'll say good morning or good evening, which I find completely superfluous, but it's cool and it illustrates the point. Well, we can store that fixed data in ROM. And that's nice because usually we have much more ROM than we have RAM. Furthermore, you can't actually store anything in RAM permanently, right? When I disconnect my car battery, say my battery's died and I replace it, when my car turns back on, it still says good morning. It still says good evening. That means it's stored in non-volatile memory. Non-volatile meaning doesn't need power to keep the data. The time is gone. I have to reset my clock. That's stored in volatile data. So if I disconnect the battery, I lose my time. Much like your microwaves and every other gosh darn thing on the planet starts blinking 12s whenever you lose power. But we can store fixed data into ROM. All we need is one more assembler directive. It's called .db, which stands for define byte. Couple of rules for using this. Must use a label. Must be in CSEG. It's an error to .db inside of a DSEG. So typically you'll see it as my name :db and then some number of values. And you can define it any way you want. In decimal, in hexadecimal. You can even, how do I get rid of this? What did I just do? Oh no. How did that happen? Okay, that was strange. All right, I guess I'll leave this up on screen. You can even define ASCII values, which is super handy. You can just say .db single quote y, and that'll give you the ASCII value for a y. You can even declare many bytes. You can define many bytes. Call it my name 2 .db 10, 20, 30. Just put commas in between the values. If you're dealing with strings, you can use double quotes. Hello. Okay, and note there I've used the null character to make it compatible with C strings. Okay. So any of those are valid for storing data in flash memory. Oh, you can't see. You guys are supposed to tell me when you can't see things. Here. Hello, \0 is the null character. Okay. So storing stuff in ROM is easy. Getting stuff out of ROM is a little bit more involved. So let's talk about that, because I think that's going to take the remainder of class, is getting stuff out of ROM. Everybody got this down? Okay. So remember, what kind of an architecture are we using in the... we're using the Harvard architecture. The Harvard architecture says that our program ROM is on its own bus than everything else. Now, thus far, we've been communicating with the everything else. And how wide is the data bus going to everything else? Yeah, it's 8 bits. Now, you guys did an assignment last night, or 2 nights ago. I handed it back just now, where you hand assembled things. And one of the things that you had to do was calculate a jump instruction, didn't you? And to do that, you just counted up the number of instructions, right? So the store took 2 instructions, and so the jump, what did it jump to? 9? Jump to 9. Well, funny thing about that, the instructions took on the form E215. Those are each hex characters, right? So how many bytes is this? Bytes consist of 8 bits. 16 bits, 2 bytes. 4 nibbles. 4 nibbles, 2 bytes, and a partridge in a pear tree. We typically call this a word. 16 bits. That particular moniker, word, is used in many different contexts to mean different things. A word can be different than 16 bits. It depends on what architecture you're in. If you're in a desktop machine, a word probably means something other than 16 bits. Just be aware, if you move on from this class, word doesn't always mean 16 bits. And so that's the thing that I want to call to your attention right now. The data bus going to program ROM is 16 bits, or 2 bytes. So that means that ROM is actually a double wide. E215. That's address 0. What else was there? 0F02. That's address 1. Here's the thing that makes all of this really complicated. The microprocessor allows byte access to ROM, which means it can get just the E2 or just the 15. It doesn't have to grab all 16 at once. So this is where things begin to get a little bit complicated. And I think I'm going to go back to the slides for a moment, because they've got a lot of numbers on there, and it's going to illustrate the point, I hope. Let's go back to screen 1 with face. Don't record. Okay. So, no, where are we? All right, so there's this instruction called LPM. It is a indirect addressing mode because it uses the index register called Z. So at its most basic, you put something into Z, and I want to be on the right screen here. Pen. 30 and 31 collectively are the Z register. This is ZH and ZL. You can always tell because the higher register is going to be the high order byte. So what does this do? This is going to read, well, this is an interesting comment here. It's going to read the low byte of location 40 hex. Is anybody bothered by the fact that it says 40 hex here? We loaded 80 into Z. And here's the thing. The key word in this comment is location. Location does not equal address. Two separate vocab words. I want you to split those up in your brain right now. Location does not equal address. Okay? Location corresponds to a 16-bit location, whereas address corresponds to an 8-bit value. So that's address, that is location. So if I tell you about a location, I'm talking about a 16-bit thing. If I'm talking about an address, it's a byte addressable thing. While I'm talking about this, LPM does have both a regular and a post increment, but not a pre-decrement, only post increment. Okay, so what the heck does all this mean in terms of our access? Well, the first thing is, yeah, 40 is the location that we're going to. So this is location 40. Let's take a look at a breakdown of a program ROM. So here's ROM. These correspond to locations. Let me just erase that. Locations. Location 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in location 0, we have addresses 0 and 1. In location 5, we have locations 10, in location 5, we have address 10 and 11, or A and B, depending on your number system. Okay? So if you want to access a particular byte, what you want to do is take the location that you are accessing and multiply it by 2, because there's 2 addresses in every location. So if I want this guy right here, okay, I take 5 and I multiply it by 2. And that will point me to the low byte in that particular memory. If I want to access the high byte, I take 5. I still multiply it by 2, but then I add 1. Now, what the heck does this have to do with the stuff that you saw in the book about there was a bunch of shifting and so forth? All right, let's take a look at this and erase everything on this slide. Why can't I erase everything on this slide? Discard. Can I get rid of this stuff? Thank you. It'll come back, I promise. Okay. A lot of code going on here. First thing first is the initialization is the part that is the hardest for people to understand for the most part. So this is what I'm going to go through right now. Right here, this is where I stored my data. So this is all in the code segment. There's no data segment here. So at address 500 in ROM, I put USA, USA. Now, my data corresponds to a location. And this is the crux of the problem. My data is a location. Where is my mouse? My data is a location. So in order to turn this into the byte address, because that's what I need to put in Z, the first thing I do is I multiply it by 2. Right? Remember shifting? Shifting left by 1 multiplies by 2. So I take my data, which is a location, I shift it left by 1, and that together becomes a byte address. So I put that into Z. And then I do an LPM, which brings out 1 byte. It's going to start by bringing out U, the letter U. Okay? Before I go too much farther, we already understand that there's a problem if you just increment the lower byte, right? We're going to end up on 100 hex boundaries. We're going to end up with problems. So let's just shortcut that. Let's look here. We're going to LPM out of Z, and we're going to increment Z. So we started with Z pointing to the U, and we loaded it. Then we incremented Z. Okay, so in memory, here we are. Low, high byte. U, S, A. So we started Z pointing to the low byte. We loaded it up, and we did an increment. So now Z is byte addressable. So now it's pointing to the S. So the second time we load it up, it's going to grab the S. Finally, there's one more LPM here, wherever it is. There it is. The last LPM doesn't do an increment because the second one does auto increment, points to the A. So overall, this is going to output, let's clear out some ink here. It's going to output U, S, A. The nice thing about this is we've stored a whole string in ROM, but we've only ever needed to grab it a byte at a time, which is how most things are. Even though you have a string that might be the Gettysburg Address, you only have to output it 1 character at a time. Okay? If you're writing the next great American novel at a typewriter, you still are pressing 1 character at a time. Okay? So that's why it's nice to store stuff in ROM. Okay. This is a different example that uses looping instead of iteratively doing it 1 character at a time. And in this case, it actually copies it into RAM. So this is nice. We can store all of our strings into ROM and then pull out 1 string at a time in RAM as we need it. So here it is. It's stored at address 500. It's a full C string. This is the ASCII representations of all these characters followed by a 0. The comma 0 just says, I'm going to do more stuff in this defined byte. Here it is, initializing it. Anytime you initialize Z, you're going to have some label shifted left by 1. That's what it does. Okay? And then here, we go back to chapter 5. We're using indirect addressing. We're loading up X, H, and XL with high and low. And here we load up 1 character, and we store it into RAM, 1 character at a time. Why are we doing a CPI with 0? This is a little bit more of a C-related topic than it is an assembly language topic, but why would we stop doing stuff if our character is 0? Hmm?
Is it like a redundant character jump? Or?
Well, it's the null character. So this is what's called a C string. It's a C style. What's going on? String. A C string is however many characters you want, ASCII characters, appended with the null character. So when you're iterating over characters, if you ever see a character that is 0, you know you've reached the end of the string. This has caused problems over the years because people have buffer overflows, and it's bad for security. So now people, instead of just relying on there being a 0 character somewhere, they have more secure methods. But C strings, you'll still find them in a lot of things, in a lot of legacy code. So that 0 is an indicator that that's the end of the string. So you just do a terminal condition here, branch if equal to end, meaning if it is 0, you're done. Just jump to the end. Otherwise, you store and then you jump back to again. Okay, so some macros that we've talked about. That macro, a init stack. Talked about load IO. We are not going to talk about EEPROM. I'm just going to skip it. Come on. We talked about splitting. Oh, I guess we didn't talk about it. Well, let's do the macro then. Let's do the macro. I need to go back here and shift to open board. Okay, so typically we have some label, my data. Really? Better now? Okay. So we have my data, and we've got some stuff. All right. Whatever it is. Okay. Now that my data is a location, 16-bit location. So whenever we want to get data, let's say we just want to get a single byte from ROM. There's 2 steps. First, we've got to fill in Z. So what I'm going to do is, let's do the basics here. First thing we do is LDI ZH high of my data, and it always has to be multiplied by 2, shifted left by 1, every time. And when I LDI ZL, I do the same thing, low my data, shifted left by 1. That's filling in Z. So let's write a macro on this to simplify this process. Because remember, I want every line in my assembly program to be a complete thought. So dot macro LDIZ. Could be more simple than LDIZ. I want to get something into Z. And I'm gonna be dead simple here. I'm gonna say ROM address. That's all I want in there, is the ROM address. So what has to happen here? Well, I have to have LDI ZH high of at 0 shifted left by 1. LDI ZL low at 0 shifted left by 1, and that's it. And macro. So my code now would look something like this. Let's do it up here, actually. LDIZ, my data. LPM Z, oh, no. R16 Z plus. Done. Load up Z with my data. Done. Okay. We can expand on this macro quite a bit. So actually, we've already written this macro. We've already written LDIZ. We wrote LDIW, right? LDIW takes a 16-bit value, puts it into 2 registers. The difference here is that we're doing that multiply by 2. I could have said just as easily here, LDIW, my data shifted left by 1, but screw that. That adds that complication back into my source code. I don't want to see that. I want my code to be as self-documenting as possible. So I will not do that. In the book, in chapter 6, it talks about lookup tables, does it not? I think that lookup tables are super, super important. A lookup table is the idea that we have some data, .db, and each location has something to do. It's related to its index. So it might just be a lookup table. A lookup table for the squares of numbers. So instead of calculating by multiplying, we might just want to do a lookup table. It might be cubes. It might be some math operation. Question? Okay. It might be some long, complicated math operation. But for today, let's just do squares. So what is 0 squared? 0. What's 1 squared? 2 squared. All right, so we can keep going. 9, 16. This could go, get this out of the way. This could go on and on for some time. So we just throw these up. We could do all the squares up to whatever is less than 255. So then we would want to calculate what our square is by doing a quick lookup. So every time we want to do a lookup, we have to do the following. LDIZ data. Right, so we fill Z in with data. Then what we have to do is we have to add something to Z. We've got to add, so let's say that R16 has our operand. All right, so whatever R16 is, we want to square that number. In order to do that, if R16 is 0, we want to load this byte. If R16 is 1, we want to load that byte. If R16 is 4, we want to load that byte. Well, that's just adding whatever is in R16 to Z. Okay? In order to do that, then, we have to do as follows. Add ZL R16. And then, if we're being full and complete, we've got to do one more step, because this suffers from a problem. What happens if your lookup table spans a 100 boundary, a 100 hex boundary? You need to make sure that you do an add with carry to ZH. And here's where I'm going to get cutesy. I'm going to call something R0, not R sub 0, the word 0. So somewhere up at the top of my program, I'm going to use my def pseudo instruction, or my def directive. And I'm going to call R0. I'm actually going to call it R1. When we get to chapter 7 next week, I will tell you why I use R1. But for now, just use R1. Just trust me. Take it on faith. And one of the things that I'm going to have to do someplace up at the top, LDI. Oh, I can't actually do an LDI R1, can I? R1 is dedicated to multiply, but that's a separate issue. What I want to do is I want to set it to 0. I want it to always hold the value 0. And I can't use LDI. So what is a a person to do. Anybody have any thoughts? Is there a clear register operation?
Yeah.
What is it? What's its opcode?
Oh no, clear bits in register. CDR. That's the one I was thinking. Oh no, there is a clear register. It's just CLR.
It is. You want to look at the screen now? It's clear register. Clear register is actually kind of cute in that it doesn't actually do anything really impressive. It actually exclusive ORs a register with itself. And the rules of exclusive OR say if you exclusive OR something with itself, it's 0. So I'm just going to, at the top, say CLR R 0. I find that I do this at the top of most of my reasonably complex programs. Anything beyond the simplest programs, I just leave R1 as the value 0, because you'd be amazed how often you have to do something like that. You know that you're adding a 16-bit value with an 8-bit value. You need to have that 0 value. So there's the full thing. That's calculating the offset from the base of your lookup table. Once you've done that, you can finally LPM, R destination. I don't know what the destination is right now. Z. This kind of approach, this is so common that I have a macro just for this. I call it LPMD. So just like I have LDD, load with displacement, I do an LPM with displacement, load from program memory with displacement. And this takes on the value base RD. I think. Is that all it does? Yep, that's it. So the LPMD dot macro is LPMD. First thing I do is I LDIZ at 0. I'm nesting my macros right now. Okay, so even my macro definitions have macro calls in them. LDIZ at 0. Then I add ZL at 1. And then I ADC ZH with R0. So this is taking a step back from what I usually do, which is make everything configurable. Every register is configurable. I know for LPM it has to be Z. So ZL and ZH, they're stuck. But I also just rely on the fact that I am using one of my 32 registers to constantly represent R0. I have to make sure that it's always R0, make always the value 0. And the last thing I'm going to do is LPM. Well, I've got two options here. Where do I want this data to go? I want it to go somewhere from Z. And I think I'm going to modify my initial setup here. Rather than doing base RD, I'm going to do R destination, base R offset. So I've got to change this around a little bit more. Now, base is going to be at 1. R offset is going to be R2. And this will be at 0. Just to keep that convention that in AVR, instructions go from right to left. It's a fun game I play to see how many times I can fit that into a lecture. Data goes from right to left. So finally, dot end macro. So this is a fairly common thing. Anytime you'll be doing byte lookup tables, this is super handy. This could be modified if you were dealing with like a word lookup table, so every location in the lookup table was 16 bits or something, but for now I think we'll handle that. That is chapter 6. So that skills exercise that I gave you, due tomorrow, because You need to build up your skills. You just need practice. You need to do the thing wrong a couple of times to find out what not to do. So you need to do it. Tomorrow, the setup will be everybody will come in. Would you guys mind if I kept you a little while longer, like 10 minutes? You might? Oh, you don't mind. All right. Very quickly, I just want to call to your attention a couple of things on the desk. In the lab, it calls for an analog discovery. These machines have a ribbon cable sticking out in front of them. Each machine around. Has everybody chosen partners, by the way? Please come in tomorrow with partners chosen. This is the analog discovery connector. We've actually, you can buy them. They don't come installed inside a computer. This is the only way we can keep them safe from theft and destruction. Each one of these cables, you can stick a little piece of wire in here. Each of these has some unique properties. They do stuff with the accompanying waveform software. The waveform software is free. You can download it. If you or a partner have an analog discovery from previous semesters, you feel free to use it on a laptop. I've laser etched the values in here. And effectively, it's split into two halves. Everybody just grab it so you can kind of see. This is mostly for people who haven't had 260 or 263 with me. If you've taken 260 or 263, this is all going to be repeated. The pink, green, purple, brown stuff on the, I guess, right side, depending on how you're looking at it, those are what are called digital I/O pins. They can be used to monitor or drive things. So when you are trying to validate stuff, and let me just pull out the lab handout here. lab handout. You got a quick one here? All right. So in part 1, it says use analog discovery to validate the design using the waveform generator. Okay. Let's put this like this and go over here. Oh, that's trippy. The waveform software, here it is. This is the waveform software up on the screen. When it says use the analog discovery to validate, what you're trying to look at is what happens with port D when you stimulate port B. So here's what you're going to do, and I'll go over this again, but I want you to sort of have this in the back of your mind. The tools are all over here on the left. There's one called a pattern generator. So what you're going to do is you're going to take 4 of those digital IOs, and it doesn't matter which ones, you just have to match it up with this. So I'm going to grab 0 through 3, and I'm going to call that pin B. Pattern generator generates a pattern. The pattern I'm going to have it generate is a binary counter. So you can't see it real well, but it's generating 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 15. It's just going to generate that and push it out over and over and over again. So that's nice because you've got 4 bits of port B. It's going to generate all of them. Now, what would you expect to see on if you're adding 30 to 0? You'd expect to see 30. If you add 30 to 1, you'd expect to see 31, and so on and so forth. Well, this is happening very fast. It's running at, well, quote, very fast. It's happening at like a kilohertz, which is too fast for you to see, but in the grand scheme of things, stupidly slow. What you're going to do then is open up another tool, and now what you're going to do, you're going to add that same pin B register, those first 4, those in there. That's going to be called pin B. Then you're going to take 8 of them, to 8 other ones, and I'm going to grab like 15 down to 8. So that's everything on the bottom half. And I'm going to call that port B. Oh, sorry, port D. And what I should see, if I turn on the pattern generator and I've got the logic generator running, what I should see is, open it up, I should be able to see what's happening on pin B. And if I had this actually hooked up to something, I would see the outputs at the same time. And I would be able to quickly check, because if I zoom out, I can see all of them happening at once. So I should be able to quickly check that I see 30 to 3F. If I don't, there's some problem there. So part 1, you can quickly check, just does it show 30 through 3F? Part 2, you can quickly check, do you get 37 to 46-ish? Validate both designs using static I/O. This is the automated test, and one of the things that I'm going to keep harping on is make it easy to test. The other way to do it is a manual test. The static I/O tool allows you to view things as LEDs or modify things as switches. They're digital I/Os, inputs or outputs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set some of these to be switches. In fact, the first 4 here. And push-pull. And then up here, these are going to be what I look at for port D. So automatically, when I set these as switches, these are currently showing 0. So I should see 30 up top. And actually, just one of the things you can also do is look at it as a progress bar. It'll tell you what the binary, what the binary value is in decimal. So that's an option for you. You can also just look at it as LEDs. So then if I bring that up to 1, I should see 31. You can go through and test all of these quantities as you go. Lastly, and the real benefit here is when you use the pattern generator and the logic analyzer, you can test part 4 very quickly. You run it once and you'll be able to see. You should see 30 through 39, and then 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. Yeah, 45. Quickly be able to check that out. The point of part of tomorrow's lab is to get you up and running with the pattern generator and the logic analyzer. So I will be going into how to connect these things when you get to that point. Please try to have parts of this up and running so that we can immediately get into that. At this point, the RAM and looping stuff, that's what we covered today in part 6, all of the indirect addressing. So I load up XH and XL, and so on and so forth. All right. Bit banging, that's old hat. And putting it all together, that's probably going to be the last part, obviously. All right. So I just wanted to call to your attention that it does exist on these computers, and you'll be using the digital I/O. You will not have to use any of the stuff on the left except for the ones that are labeled V. Okay. The third ones over are both labeled V. They are conveniently both black wires. The V stands for the ground symbol. That's how I was able to laser etch it. So there's actually 4 black wires, okay? And those 4 black wires, you must connect at least one of them to the development board where it says ground. And I'll just show you that there's 2 places where that is the case. Okay. If you look there, they're all labeled, but there are 2 grounds. Where are they? Right there. There's also a ground that is showing up, right? Focus. I swear it's right there, but it's not focusing. Oh, that's because it's been ripped to shreds. Let's look at a different one. All right, let's look at this one. Yeah, that's much better. Ground. So you have to connect one of those to ground so that there's a common ground between the 2 things. Although now that I think of it, if they're plugged into the same computer, they probably share a ground. But be safe. So what you will have when you come in tomorrow is you'll get one of these development boards. You'll get a supply of wire. You should bring wire strippers as part of your lab kit. If you don't have them, I probably can find a few lying about. Any kind of cheap wire snippers will be fine to get some wire. If you have pre-made wires, like do I have like things like this with the DuPont connectors, those may or may not work. They may or may not fit snugly. If you have this kind of model, and I don't know if this is going to really play on camera here, this is kind of thinner. Oh yeah, ooh, it moves. These are not so good for connecting up to the analog discovery. These, which are the full crimped DuPont connectors, these are a little better because they're actually square. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. This is just a round piece of wire. So your mileage may vary. All right, I've given homework, right? We have lab 9 a.m. tomorrow. Any questions? Yeah, you can get your lab sheet back. All right.
Yeah, homework. Was that supposed to be like just continually
Yeah, forever. Forever. I did say something about that. I'll leave the homework up on the screen if I can find it. Yep, there it is. Okay, so I will end it with that image. So if you want, you can just go to the end of the video to find the homework. All right. Thanks for sticking with me for an extra 10.